The Shoes of Fortune. Chapter 3. The Watchman's Adventure. "Why, there is a pair of galoshes, as sure as I'm alive," said the watchman, awaking from a gentle slumber. "They belong no doubt to the lieutenant who lives over the way. They lie close to the door." The worthy man was inclined to ring and deliver them at the house, for there was still a light in the window. But he did not like disturbing the other people in their beds, and so very considerately he left the matter alone. "Such a pair of shoes must be very warm and comfortable," said he. "The leather is so soft and supple, they fitted his feet as though they had been made for him. 'Tis a curious world we live in," continued he, soliloquizing. "There is a lieutenant now who might go quietly to bed if he chose, where no doubt he could stretch himself at his ease. But does he do it? No, he saunters up and down his room, because probably he has enjoyed too many of the good things of this world at his dinner. That's a happy fellow. He has neither an infirm mother nor a whole troop of everlastingly hungry children to torment him. Every evening he goes to a party where his nice supper costs him nothing. Would to heaven I could but change with him. How happy should I be!" While expressing his wish, the charm of the shoes, which he had put on, began to work. The watchman entered into the being and nature of the lieutenant. He stood in the handsomely furnished apartment, and held between his fingers a small sheet of rose-colored paper, on which some verses were written indeed by the officer himself, for who has not, at least once in his life, had a lyrical moment? And if one then marks down one's thoughts, poetry is produced. But here was written, "Oh, were I rich! Oh, were I rich! Such was my wish, yes, such. When hardly 3 feet high, I longed for much. Oh, were I rich, an officer were I, with sword and uniform, and plumes so high. And the time came, an officer was I. But yet I grew not rich, alas, poor me. Have pity, thou, who all man's wants dost see." I sat one evening sunk in dreams of bliss. A maid of 7 years old gave me a kiss. I at that time was rich in poesy, the tales of old, though poor as poor could be. But all she asked for was this poesy. Then was I rich, but not in gold, poor me. As thou dost know, who all men's hearts canst see. Oh, were I rich, oft asked I for this boon. The child grew up to womanhood full soon. She is so pretty, clever, and so kind. Oh, did she know what's hidden in my mind? A tale of old, would she to me were kind. But I'm condemned to silence, oh, poor me, as thou dost know, who all men's hearts canst see. Oh, were I rich in calm and peace of mind, my grief you then would not here written find. O thou to whom I do my heart devote, O read this page of glad days now remote, a dark, dark tale which I tonight devote. Dark is the future now, alas, poor me. Have pity, thou, who all men's pains dost see. Such verses as these people write when they are in love. But no man in his senses ever thinks of printing them. Here one of the sorrows of life, in which there is real poetry, gave itself vent. Not that barren grief which the poet may only hint at, but never depict in its detail, misery and want, that animal necessity, in short, to snatch at least at a fallen leaf of the breadfruit tree, if not at the fruit itself. The higher the position in which one finds oneself transplanted, the greater is the suffering. Everyday necessity is the stagnant pool of life. No lovely picture reflects itself therein. Lieutenant, love, and lack of money, that is a symbolic triangle, or much the same as the half of the shattered die of fortune. This the lieutenant felt most poignantly, and this was the reason he leant his head against the window and sighed so deeply. The poor watchman out there in the street is far happier than I. He knows not what I term privation. He has a home, a wife, and children who weep with him over his sorrows, who rejoice with him when he is glad. Oh, far happier were I, could I exchange with him my being, with his desires and with his hopes perform the weary pilgrimage of life. Oh, he is 100 times happier than I. In the same moment, the watchman was again watchman. It was the shoes that caused the metamorphosis, by means of which, unknown to himself, he took upon him the thoughts and feelings of the officer. But, as we have just seen, he felt himself in his new situation much less contented, and now preferred the very thing which but some minutes before he had rejected. So then, the watchman was again watchman. "That was an unpleasant dream," said he, "but 'twas droll enough altogether. I fancied that I was the lieutenant over there, and yet the thing was not very much to my taste after all. I missed my good old mother and the dear little ones, who almost tear me to pieces for sheer love." He seated himself once more and nodded. The dream continued to haunt him, for he still had his shoes on his feet. A falling star shone in the dark firmament. "There falls another star," said he. "But what does it matter? There are always enough left. I should not much mind examining the little glimmering things somewhat nearer, especially the moon, for that would not slip so easily through a man's finger. When we die, so at least says the student, for whom my wife does the washing, we shall fly about as light as a feather from one such a star to the other. That's of course not true, but 'twould be pretty enough if it were so. If I could but once take a leap up there, my body might stay here on the steps for what I care. Behold, there are certain things in the world to which one ought never to give utterance, except with the greatest caution. But doubly careful must one be when we have the shoes of fortune on our feet. Now, just listen to what happened to the watchman. As to ourselves, we all know the speed produced by the employment of steam. We have experienced it either on railroads or in boats when crossing the sea. but such a flight is like the traveling of a sloth in comparison with the velocity with which light moves. It flies 19 million times faster than the best racehorse, and yet electricity is quicker still. Death is an electric shock which our heart receives. The freed soul soars upwards on the wings of electricity. The sun's light wants 8 minutes and some seconds to perform a journey of more than 20 million of our Danish miles. Born by electricity, the soul wants even some minutes less to accomplish the same flight. To it, the space between the heavenly bodies is not greater than the distance between the homes of our friends in town is for us, even if they live a short way from each other. Such an electric shock in the heart, however, costs us the use of the body here below, unless, like the watchman of East Street, we happen to have on the shoes of fortune. Footnote: a Danish mile is nearly 4 3/4 English. End of footnote. In a few seconds, the watchman had done the 52,000 of our miles up to the moon, which, as everyone knows, was formed out of matter much lighter than our earth, and is, so we should say, as soft as newly fallen snow. He found himself on one of the many circumjacent mountain ridges with which we are acquainted by means of Dr. Madler's map of the moon. Within, down it sunk perpendicularly into a cauldron, about a Danish mile in depth, while below lay a town, whose appearance we can in some measure realize to ourselves by beating the white of an egg in a glass of water. The matter of which it was built was just as soft, and formed similar towers and domes and pillars, transparent and rocking in thin air, while above his head our earth was rolling like a large fiery ball. He perceived immediately a quantity of beings who were certainly what we call men, yet they looked different to us. A far more correct imagination than that of the pseudo-Herschel had created them, and if they had been placed in rank and file and copied by some skillful painter's hand, one would, without doubt, have exclaimed involuntarily, "What a beautiful arabesque!" Footnote: this relates to a book published some years ago in Germany, and said to be by Herschel, which contained a description of the moon and its inhabitants, written with such a semblance of truth that many were deceived by the imposture. End of footnote. Probably a translation of the celebrated moon hoax, written by Richard A. Locke, and originally published in New York. They had a language too, but surely nobody can expect that the soul of the watchman should understand it. Be that as it may, it did comprehend it, for in his souls there germinate far greater powers than we poor mortals, despite all our cleverness, have any notion of. Does she not show us, she, the queen in the land of enchantment, her astounding dramatic talent in all our dreams? There every acquaintance appears and speaks upon the stage, so entirely in character, and with the same tone of voice, that none of us, when awake, were able to imitate it. How well can she recall persons to our mind of whom we have not thought for years, when suddenly they step forth every inch a man, resembling the real personages, even to the finest features, and become the heroes or heroines of our world of dreams. In reality, such remembrance are rather unpleasant. Every sin, every evil thought may, like a clock with alarm or chimes, be repeated at pleasure. Then the question is, if we can trust ourselves to give an account of every unbecoming word in our heart and on our lips. The watchman's spirit understood the language of the inhabitants of the moon pretty well. The Selenites disputed variously about our earth, and expressed their doubts if it could be inhabited. The air, they said, must certainly be too dense to allow any rational dweller in the moon the necessary free respiration. They considered the moon alone to be inhabited. They imagined it was the real heart of the universe or planetary system, on which the genuine cosmopolites or citizens of the world dwelt. What strange things men know, what strange things Cenalites sometimes take into their heads. Footnote, dwellers in the moon. End of footnote. About politics, they had a good deal to say, but little Denmark must take care what it is about, and not run counter to the moon, that great realm, that might, in an ill humor, bestir itself, and dash down a hailstorm in our faces, or force the Baltic to overflow the sides of its gigantic basin. We will, therefore, not listen to what was spoken, and on no condition run in the possibility of telling tales out of school. But we will rather proceed, like good quiet citizens, to East Street, and observe what happened meanwhile to the body of the watchman. He sat lifeless on the steps, the morning star, that is to say, the heavy wooden staff, headed with iron spikes, and which had nothing else in common with its sparkling brother in the sky, had glided from his hand, while his eyes were fixed with glassy stare on the moon, looking for the good old fellow of a spirit which still haunted it. Footnote, the watchmen in Germany had formerly, and in some places they still carry with them, on their rounds at night, a sort of mace or club, known in ancient times by the above denomination. End of footnote. "What's the hour, watchman?" asked the passer-by. But when the watchman gave no reply, the merry roisterer, who was now returning home from a noisy drinking bout, took it into his bead to try what a tweak of the nose would do, on which the supposed sleeper lost his balance. The body lay motionless, stretched out on the pavement. The man was dead. When the patrol came up, all his comrades, who comprehended nothing of the whole affair, were seized with a dreadful fright, for dead he was, and he remained so. The proper authorities were informed of the circumstance. People talked a good deal about it, and in the morning the body was carried to the hospital. Now that would be a very pretty joke if the spirit, when it came back and looked for the body in his East Street, were not to find one. No doubt it would, in its anxiety, run off to the police, and then to the hue and cry office, to announce that the finder will be handsomely rewarded, and, at last, away to the hospital. Yet we may boldly assert that the soul is shrewdest when it shakes off every fetter, and every sort of leading string the body only makes it stupid. The seemingly dead body of the watchman wandered, as we have said, to the hospital, where it was brought into the general viewing room, and the first thing that was done here was naturally to pull off the galoshes, when the spirit, that was merely gone out on adventures, must have returned with the quickness of lightning to its earthly tenement. It took its direction towards the body in a straight line, and a few seconds after, life began to show itself in the man. He asserted that the preceding night had been the worst that ever the malice of fate had allotted him. He would not for 2 silver marks again go through what he had endured while moon-stricken. But now, however, it was over. The same day he was discharged from the hospital as perfectly cured, but the shoes meanwhile remained behind.